What does the end of the PKK means for the future of the Kurds and the Kurdistan? Let's see first a short introduction and context about the PKK. The Kurdistan Worker Party, the PKK, Partiya Kurd and Kurdistan, founded in 1978, was founded after the persecution and the oppression by the Turkish state against the Kurds. Until 1991, even the word Kurd was actually forbidden in Turkey. The Kurdish family name, the Kurdish name villages, the Kurdish city names and so on were actually changed and forced to change. The letters W, Q, X were actually also forbidden because they were Kurdish and therefore they were a sign of identity resistance. The PKK has been a major catalyst for the Kurdish resistance in northern Kurdistan occupied by Turkey. It allowed entire generations of Kurds to actually develop political consciousness and also at some extent fight for their cultural and linguistic rights in a state that is trying to erase them completely. The figure of the 40,000 deaths related to the PKK conflict is actually misleading because the vast majority of it is due to the Turkish state that have been killing the vast majority of Kurdish civilians and also Kurdish fighters. And this narrative has been pushed to justify and to show that the PKK would be the only source of violence in this conflict. The original goal of the PKK was to create a Kurdish nation, a Kurdistan. But then this slowly faded away and we heard about autonomy within Turkey, federalism within Turkey, and then this again downgraded to having local council in Kurdish municipality. And within the PKK, more and more Turkish language was used in the debates, in the communique, in the trainings. And these two led to actually breed some mistrust among the Kurdish community that was feeling that their nation cause was traded away and sometimes struggling to know who to believe, who to trust within the PKK. This different transition could be explained by regional context and also the impossibility for guerrilla to actually win a war and also the forced assimilation of the Kurd of Bakur, but still, it led to some mistrust among the Kurds. And the PKK actions, they have been used as an excuse by the Turkish state to actually oppress even more the entire Kurdish population, and they even went to the point where Turkey was actually making up fake terrorist attacks in their own soil, killing their own people and blaming the PKK to oppress even more the Kurds and also isolate the PKK as a movement internationally. They even operate outside of Turkey and went to southern Kurdistan, which is northern Iraq, and deployed 35 military bases and also bombed not only the PKK but also civilians in Kurdistan. So slowly the PKK became the convenient excuse, the scapegoat for the Turkish state to suppress any linguistic, cultural or political emancipation of the Kurds in Turkey and internationally. No matter where you're from, no matter who you are, if you were doing something for the Kurds, even culturally, they would actually blame you to be PKK, therefore violent, therefore terrorist, and they would oppress you and jail you. The PKK was indeed listed as a terrorist organization after the 9/11 in the US. They actually adopted a wider and broader scope of terrorist organization, and in order to align with the NATO interest and to satisfy Turkey interest, they also included the PKK. And this happened to the surprise of US specialists because the PKK was the only left-wing armed group in Turkey that never targeted the military bases of Americans in Turkey. Then the UK also followed with the US list in order to have a common position internationally. And the European Union, which aligns in terms of geopolitics with NATO, US and UK, also reused the same list, which I quote, following persistent demands from Turkey, and which remember also applied to the European Union in 1999, and this list was reused in 2002 when the European Union was trying to get closer to Turkey and push some alignment together. That said, the guerrilla movement, which is extremely honorable because the fighters are giving up their whole life, everything, to live in harsh conditions in the mountains in order to fight for their right and identity. But militarily speaking, there is no win with the guerrilla movement. Indeed, Turkey is a powerful conventional army, also has technological advancement, and also is backed by NATO. So, unless it's like Syria where the country is completely destabilized for 10 years and then there is no such powerful state with conventional army, and then the guerrilla movement could actually have some military gain and win, like we can see in northern Syria in Rojava. And the guerrilla operates in remote area which is far away from the Turkish power centers. But let's not be naive, the PKK dissolution actually fits Turkey's geopolitical agenda. Its leader, Abdullah Öcalan, has been in solitary confinement for 26 years in a prison in Turkey. His declaration of the dissolution of the PKK came through a letter that must have been approved by the Turkish state geopolitical agenda. Instead of a letter, there was supposed to be a video, but they released actually a picture, and you can see a microphone wire coming through, so there is a video. It's just the Turkish state is filtering every communication that is coming out in order to fit their geopolitical agenda. A political party can be dissolved, but a Kurdistan cannot be dissolved. It's a geographic and ethnic reality on the ground. It is passed down, it is strengthened, it's a land, it's a memory, and it is a will. It lived, is living, and will live. In the statement, they also insist that Turkey must uphold their commitment, which personally I don't believe so, because the PKK have tried many times to make peace with Turkey. 1993, 1995, 1998, 2006, 2009, 2013. Why would they do it now? To be fair, in the Kurdish political spectrum, the PKK has been the strongest one around internationally and also in the region, but it's made by individuals like you. You made the movement, you made the ideology, and the ideology is within you. It's called Kurdistan. So what is the Turkey interest actually into this? Why do they lay this communication out? Why do they want to play it now? There are a couple of scenarios, couple of theories. None of them would be actually the real golden truth, because geopolitical is unpredictable. Is this tied to electoral goal from Erdogan, which now the world realizes that he is a proper dictator and he wants to paint himself as the man who actually ended the Kurdish terrorism? Maybe. Or do they feel right now that their state is strong enough to not be destabilized and that the Kurds have been assimilated enough and lost their desire for independent Kurdistan? So the main players around the Middle East where Kurdistan is are still the Europeans and the Americans, and they have their interest that is aligned with Turkey. For example, in the context of the conflict with Ukraine, they care more about Ukraine. It touched directly their direct interest than Kurdistan that is over there. Or Azerbaijan with the gas that is coming out of it instead of going through Russia that is actually paying more and sanctions and so on. So they go through Azerbaijan, Turkey and Europe to have cheap gas. This is for them more important than an independent Kurdistan. So the United States, Europe, Turkey and Israel have common and actually aligned interests. Since October 7 of last year, the influence of Iran in the Middle East has been reduced. Indeed, Iran was supporting different rebel groups and proxies such as Hamas in Palestine, but also Turkey was supporting them, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq, and also at some extent the PKK. So is it in the same strategy of alignment of pushing out the Iranian influence? What is for sure is that if you reduce the Iranian influence in the Middle East, you also indirectly target Russia that is busy with Ukraine war right now. Also, Turkey faces reality. You cannot silence a people of 40 to 50 million. They've tried so much by oppressing them, suppressing them, but the will of a Kurdistan is still there. And today, thanks to the internet, the Kurdish fight is actually more visible and more communicated around the world. And they know it's a reality they must accept, because if you go to a fascist Turk and you tell him Kurdistan, why is he getting annoyed? Because he knows that it's a reality that he will need to accept at some point in his life, and they just cannot face it. Could this be a prelude of the emergence of Rojava, so a Kurdish autonomous region in Syria like we have in Iraq since 1991 and it's called Kurdistan? Well, Turkey was destabilizing the region and since 2012 by bombing it regularly, the civilian infrastructure, the civilians, the fighters and so on. They were even supporting ISIS against the Kurds. That's how motivated they were to destabilize the region to avoid a Kurdish state and region. So the excuse that Turkey was using was there is PKK, so it's a terrorist group, so I'm allowed to bomb anyone, everything, anywhere, anytime I want. Well, this excuse doesn't hold anymore because the PKK is dissolved, so why would you bomb the Kurds again if the PKK is not there? And actually, that's not even me saying it.
Suriye'nin kuzeyindeki YPG'ye nasıl operasyon yapacağız? Ha?
Yani elimizdeki haklı tezi kaybedeceğimizi söylüyorsunuz, öyle düşünüyorsunuz.
However, Turkey don't really care of international laws. It's still illegally occupying Cyprus. It's also bullied Greece. It also interfered with Libya. It also interfered with Armenia. However, Rojava could be also key to actually reduce the Iranian influence within the Middle East. However, just like Southern Kurdistan, if Rojava is created, they will still be deprived from sea access and also air access because it's still under the Syrian sovereignty. This makes them dependent on land routes for export and import from the neighboring country. So we have Iran that is under embargo for decades, so let's not count on them as a route of growth and prosperity in terms of economy, financial and so on. Iraq is also underdeveloped and also still under some restriction in terms of finance. Syria is completely destroyed and also managed by ISIS, so the only routes that we have in terms of lands is through Turkey. So the Kurds are an enclave, their only routes for growth and access and anything would be again Turkey, so that makes us dependent on Turkey and not really sovereign. I'm sure Turkey knows it, because they already have financial and economic power over southern Kurdistan for the exact same reason that they would get for western Kurdistan, Rojava. And also Turkey has built over the decades dozens and dozens and dozens of dams across the Tigris and Euphrates that are only two rivers in the Middle East, and without water human dies in 3 days. Now that the PKK is dissolved, the southern Kurdistan could actually connect deeper with the western Kurdistan. Their ideology and political interests were separated and manipulated by the Turkish state that got economical and financial power and control over southern Kurdistan. What is certain is that nature abhors a vacuum. The struggle for the Kurds, the Kurdish right, and the Kurdistan will always continue in different shapes, in different form, and it starts with your commitment. You make the different movement. Let it be cultural, identity-based, politically. It starts with you. Support the different people doing anything, any project for the Kurds. And as we say, as long as there is one Kurd, there will be a Kurdistan. Because geographically and identity, we are here, we exist, so does Kurdistan.